Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday night Punch, Kick, Choke chat. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm so excited to be here. Our host chat last week was amazing, but really what's so great about the show is that we get to interview and spend time with guests and masters and people who've been doing martial arts, in tonight's case, for 10 years longer than I've been alive. And that's just such an honor and a gift. And that's fundamentally why we created this show. So our host chat are little gorgeous beacons for us to chat with each other about our ideas, but we're back to our format tonight and I'm so excited for it. You might be watching us on YouTube. Smash that subscribe and like button. You might be listening on a podcast. Share with your friends. We're really happy you're here. One of the things I get to do every night is I get to introduce Sensei Nicholas Suino. He's an 8th Dan in Iaido, a 6th Dan in Jiu-Jitsu, a 6th Dan in Judo. And the one thing that I've mentioned and we've talked about, he was our first guest on this show, is that in 1988, he just sold his belongings, he bought a plane ticket, and he moved to Yokohama, Japan, and spent the next 4 years there, basically being, a live-in disciple of his sword instructor, as well as doing judo over there. Sensei Suino, what an incredible thing that can never be overstated, that you put your money where your mouth is, you went to the homeland, so to speak. And why'd you do it? How'd you do it? And how you doing tonight?
Hey, Sean, great to see you. And thanks for that introduction. Wonderful, as always. Who doesn't dream of going to the homeland? I'd been studying martial arts for 20 years, finished grad school. Man, it was the time. It was the time. Scraped up. And though, there's absurd amounts, in those days. I think I scraped up $3,000. Thought that was a ton of money. Went over there and found that it went away rather quickly, but got a job. And I'm happy to say for 4 years, I worked 20 hours a week and I trained at least 20. So it was a fabulous experience. And I've been looking with a lot of longing at posts about Tokyo these days. I really want to get back there, and I'm hoping that things can settle down so we can start doing international travel again.
Amazing.
You're back home.
I am.
Yeah, you were bouncing around and back in Toronto, huh?
I was in Texas. I was in Los Angeles, and I'm actually off to Boston for a family wedding tomorrow, and then I'm off to Calgary next Friday for 3 weeks to do my next project. So
nice.
It's a real, we're opening up just enough that I can get back in my groove. I just see Sensei nodding there. Like, he knows how important my work is to me and how much I love it. And it's nice to combine that with some fun stuff too.
Yeah, man. Well, I can't wait to hear about more of these projects. It's so fun watching your career.
You'll see the hotel rooms behind me as we do our episodes.
Right. Yeah, we get to stream from all over the place with you.
Sure.
It falls to me every time we do one of these episodes to introduce Sensei Randy Dauphin. Those of you who are new to the call may or may not know he's very highly ranked in karate and Iaido. He's multi-time world champion fighter, a great kata practitioner, exercise fanatic. And since we're talking about Japan, a guy that's been to Japan a couple of times, once with me, and we had just a riotous good time, a 9 or 10 day trip that consisted of high speed coffee drinking, train traveling, beer drinking, martial arts training, and all kinds of other stuff. Just a lifetime experience. I had so much fun on that trip. Randy, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Sensei. And it's funny that you said that, because my notes tonight, I thought, I'm going to say a little something about being in Japan with my senseis, because I've been to Japan with both of my senseis. And what I wrote tonight, Sensei Suino, was I went to Japan with Sensei Suino, and we walked, and then we trained with Sato Sensei, and then we walked, and we trained with Nobetsu Sensei, and then we walked, and then we trained with Yahagi Sensei, and then we walked, and we trained in your Judo home dojo. We walked and we built a sword. We walked and we bought a sushi knife. That sushi knife's never been used, but the sword is used, already got thousands of hours on it now. We literally ate like a $4,500 sushi dinner that I didn't pay even a cent for. And it was only 6 people having that dinner. Sensei Suino and I had a very interesting experience in Meiji Temple alone. It was just the 2 of us, and it just was a really cool thing. We rode more trains, drank more beer, ate more ramen and sushi than probably is humanly possible. And it's funny that we're all talking about Japan stuff tonight, because one of the things I was thinking when I was working out in here tonight was about that trip. So I'm doing great, Sensei. And it's funny, we're all on this Japan wavelength.
Well, I just don't want this conversation to pass without mentioning that we also had spaghetti and meatballs in the same restaurant where you had spaghetti and meatballs with Hanchi Legacy.
That's right. We did. We went to the same place and had spaghetti and meatballs. That's true. Anyway, and I hope we go back again soon. I also want to go back, and I know Sensei Legacy wants to go back because we were talking about it. And for me personally, if we could all go back together, that would be like super cool. Like if we could all be there at the same time, that would be amazing. For me,
we can do that.
Yeah, we will do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to introduce Sensei Legacy and our guest, and then I'm going to send it back to Sensei Suino to give some comments about Sensei Pinaki. So Sensei Legacy is a 10th degree black belt, and he was awarded that rank by his teacher, who is his teacher now, Anthony Sandoval. He's a member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. He's an author. I'm reading this again for about the 10th time. I get something great out of it every time. He has been a student of Harold Warden, Ben Yallen, Richard Kim, Anthony Sandoval, who is his sensei. And actually, he's a sword student of Sensei Suino's as well. And he has a ranking in Iaido as well. I was also thinking about my trip with Sensei Legacy. And when we went to Japan, and there were a couple of really cool things that happened there. One, we got to go to a legitimate, authentic tea ceremony together. We got to sit in seiza side by side, longer than humanly possible, until the tea master said, guests are permitted to sit cross-legged. So then we fell out of seiza and crossed our legs and with our white tabby socks on. We knelt at Matsumori and Itoshi Etsune's graves, knelt there and paid our respects. We trained with Ikihara Sensei in the shadow of Shuri Castle, which is now being rebuilt. That castle no longer exists, but we trained in the shadow of that castle. And we had some interesting experiences with Kizei Taba. And the one thing that I want to mention about Master Taba was that we went out to dinner with Sensei Legacy and Master Taba. And Master Taba wanted to take us to like a famous training facility in Naha, Okinawa. And for a moment got quite offended when Sensei Legacy said that we weren't going to go train because we already had plans. And the question was asked through the interpreter, what could be more important? I'm paraphrasing, what could be more important than going and training with me in this place? And Sensei Legacy informed him that we wanted to go to Matsumori and Itoshi's graves, and we wanted to clean the graves and wash things down and kneel down and pay our respects. And Master Taba's demeanor instantly changed. And he said, how is it that you would fly from all the way across the world to come here, and some of my students don't even know where those people's graves are? So that's the introduction I want to give for Sensei Legacy, that he's the kind of guy who will take his students from Canada all the way across the world to the gravesite of the founders of the system that he's been teaching now for over 50 years. How's that, Sensei Legacy? That's a little different than the last couple introductions. So now I'm gonna introduce Sensei Al Panackia. Sensei Pinaki is a 6th Dan in Judo and been training since 1965. So Benson said 10 years for him. Not quite 10 years for me, but close. He's both a national and an international judo champion. He's competed in many of the prestigious competitions, including the National Kata Championships in the United States, the Pan American Judo Kata Championships, and the World Masters Judo Kata Championships. Sensei Pinaki and his longtime kata partner, Mark Pascalelli, I hope I said that right. Sadly, Sensei Pascalelli has passed away now, but they were together. They were 3-time medalists at the 2005 National Kata Championships in Virginia Beach. They were silver medalists in 2005 Pan American Kata Champions in Puerto Rico. and they won gold, silver, and bronze medals at the 2005 World Masters Championships right here in Mississauga, Canada, the true north. Okay. That his partner, they were also named the Kata Competitors of the Year in 2002, 2003, and 2004 by the United States Judo Federation. Couple of thoughts that I have. I don't know Sensei Pinaki well. We chatted earlier this week, but I can tell you in Sensei Legacy's books, he's not a quitter. He's been in martial arts for a long time, well over 30 years. I can also tell you he's also not a martial arts bigot. He logs into this show no matter who it is. If it's a modern martial artist, MMA, karate, Iaido, whoever it is, he logs in and he gets some joy from listening to us talk. He's been on every single podcast so far. And I just want to publicly thank him for being such a good supporter of this show. We could use about 10,000 more of you. Not exactly like you, but 10,000 more people who are so excited about this show. You know, a couple of other things about him is you only need to talk with him for a few moments to realize he's a really nice person and he's very easy to talk with. He's also a very intelligent person. I know that already, and he's very well spoken. He pays a lot of respects to the people who've helped him. When I talked to him, you know, he talked about our future guest, Francis Glaze, and he really talked a lot about his training partner. And another thing I just want to say is the guy's got a great smile. I'm telling you, he always has a big smile. Yeah, and don't let those youthful looks on the screen fool you. He's a little bit older than you might think. So that's my introduction, and I'm going to kick it over to you, Sensei, if you have any thoughts or anything you want to add to that.
Well, thank you so much. I think we'll dig into it. But as I said before the show started, I've known Al for many years. He just reminded me that he came into my dojo in Lansing in 1996 briefly, and he has come as a guest to so many of the events we've done at JMAC, regardless of the martial art, obviously specifically around judo, but others as well. And I think we've escalated our relationship just a bit when he came not so long ago with Glaze Sensei to help teach Naginocoda. So yeah, I've been looking forward to learning more about Al's history and training for months and months, and I'm so glad that it's finally come to this.
Awesome. I'm just going to say real quick to everybody watching, and I say this every time, you've got your chat button at the bottom of the screen. We really want you to use that. We want you to engage with us. You're part of this living history. You chose to be here as part of the Zoom, which is so amazing for us. And fire your questions. And if they're of quality, Robert will forward them to us and we'll get them to our guest. And also, as I always say, you might hear some swearing, you might hear some off-color stories. You're listening to Five Adults Talk, and we'll say what we feel like saying. And if you don't like it, you can re-watch it, but plug your ears when the part you don't like comes up. And if you miss it, re-watch it again and keep trying to get it. And then you'll get our view count up. But in any case, that's all the housekeeping I have for the show. I'm so excited to chat with our guests tonight as well. Sensei Pinaki, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well.
Great.
I'm excited that I believe my daughter's on, listening, and she's in Nashville, so we don't get to see her that often. And Rommelman is an old friend of mine for Kata, and possibly Brian Marks might be on here. And he's like my original judo partner.
That's amazing. We're really grateful that you could, bring some of your folks along to enjoy the episode and that they get to watch it tonight. I'm asking this question not about our show. It's about why do you keep tuning in? What is it? And, Sensei just said this about you showing up for his seminars, etc. What is it about you that makes you go, I'm gonna watch every episode, no matter who's on?
Well, I have a big interest in a lot of martial arts. There's not just one way of doing something. And this is a chance to see all these people. When Johan was on, and it's like, I'm not going to get to Europe to see him. And, I've done some Eskrima or Kali or Arnes, whatever you want to call it. So everything just helps to add to my education.
That's awesome. So let's go back to the beginning, as we like to with our guests. Tell us what it was like growing up for you, and what made you walk into that dojo for the first time, and what made you stay?
Well, as I started to think now, since I was supposed to be on the show a few weeks ago, then it really dawned on me that in elementary school, there was a kid there named Randy Sano. And Randy, for the day that we were showing our hobbies, said that he did judo and he needed a partner. So I volunteered to have him throw me around. It's my first time being uke. I was not doing judo at that time. But back in the 60s, judo was a really interesting topic. You'd hear the comic book people doing it. You just heard all these different things, even on Dobie Gillis, if people are old enough to remember that, and Life with Riley, that show, the Nelsons. And I kind of grew up at the YMCA, the Northwestern YMCA in Detroit. And they had judo there. And I took the beginner's class with a guy named Tom Tripp. And so he was my first instructor, but that was just a beginner's class. After my beginner's class, he left. And this gentleman named Paul Wemraw came as the physical director, and he did judo. And so I really consider him my first real instructor, because after school, I'd come over and hang out with him. I helped him teach swimming classes, gym classes. And even though I wasn't, a ranked judo person, I got to come to some of his classes to help teach, shall we say. And this is just something that I did. I didn't do it super well in the beginning, but it was an interest there. And we went through the time where you drag out the horsehair mats to the gymnasium. But then a couple of years later, they added on to the gym and they built a side room, and that was the dojo. And they had tires down with plywood on top of that. And this was a dojo with a floating floor. And, a year or two later, Mr. Wemmer was going up for promotion to Nidan, and he needed a partner. And we were close to the same size back then, about 5'5". And I learned Naginocoda at that point, where I was his uke, and I was only 15 years old. And, I kind of kept doing it. Tom Sheehan's on, and he knows I've been a kata partner with a lot of different people. And it's just something that I liked. But there's a time where I took Tang Sudo with Jay Kim in Detroit, and he was with the Mudokwan Association. And I would go during the afternoon, the 4 to 6 o'clock. And sometimes I'd stay, there's an hour break, and then I'd stay for the evening class. But on the nights when there was judo, I went to karate first and then judo, second. But I've always fallen back to judo is the one art that really, really interests me, but you can encompass different techniques, because it's all the same thing, where you want to figure out maximum efficiency with minimum effort.
So I just want to poke in there, Sensei Suino. I see you nodding almost wistfully, talking about the training partners, talking about being 15 and being asked to help somebody who's a higher rank. That seemed to evoke something for you.
I just wanted to clarify something, Al. That was what was the dojo again, where you started on the horsehair mats and went to the tire floating floor?
Or Northwestern YMCA at 7 Mile and Lasser.
Yeah, that's
Northwest Detroit.
That's cool. That's what I thought.
There.
We've trained. You and I have trained on a lot of different judo floors, and you've been on the JMAC floor, which is Springs, and Sensei Steve Morris from a long history. He's the guy that encouraged us to get Springs at JMAC rather than some other floor. When I was training at the United States Judo Institute in Colorado Springs, they have a tire-based floor. And one of the things I found, and I'm wondering if you experience this too, is that tire-based floors are really good for the condition down, but they are slow to get up. It feels like they deprive you of energy, right? It's like walking on the moon in a movie or something. Whereas the springs give you a little more energy. What do you remember about that?
Well, that was a long time ago. And so, we had energy to get up as well as go down. So it didn't really matter. But even some of the gymnasts would come in and tumble in there because that was a lead up to a spring floor.
Mm-hmm.
Like Nick said, like at the Kodokan, I mean, that's a great floor, and your floor is very similar to the Kodokan. And you could take falls for a long time on that stuff.
So Sensei Pinaki and then Sensei Suino, we'll go in that order. Talk to the people like myself who are more familiar with stand-up or full matted floors for grappling, with what the different floors that are best for judo are and what you'd most like to train on.
Well, I would prefer a floating floor because when you put an 1.5-inch foam mat on top of cement, you don't get a lot of give. And so, you hit that floor. Sometimes when they had that ethafoam, your leg would kind of spring back up. You land on your side, and there's that sideways motion, which I don't know is really good for your knees. But Nick's mats are great. And when we were at the Kodokan competing, when we did Judo Kata, where you never actually throw, but you pick the person up and you balance like halfway through, they would not have us compete on the same day Naginocoda was going on, the forms of throwing, because you could feel the reverberation or vibration from one mat over to the other mat. So if you're doing a lot of stand-up and throwing, that floating floor is good. If you're going really hard, sometimes when you practice your throws, landing on a crash pad will take take even more force off.
What about you, Sensei Suino? What's your fave?
Well, floors with springs are my favorite. The JMAC floor has 4.5 or 5-inch springs, and there's over 2,000 of them under our floor.
Wow.
The floors in a lot of the dojos in Japan, the big schools like the sprung floor at the Kodokan and at the Yokohama Kanagawa Budokan, where I train mostly, they build a floating floor with giant timbers that are interlaced, and they have truck springs. So our springs are about this big. Their springs I've seen the schematics for it, and they're a little less forgiving than ours, but still just hugely better than any other kind of floor that is on cement or wood or anything else like that.
That sounds significant. Sensei Pinaki, going back to when you're talking about this time at the Y and meeting the person who you started to partner with, it sounds like you glommed onto him as a man as much as the judo itself. Am I right about that? Helping with the swimming, etc. You found a mentor.
Call him my second father. He was my YMCA father.
Right.
And he would take me to tournaments, sometimes just to watch. But, we spent a lot of time together. And when I had to learn Naginocoda with him, that wasn't something you did once or twice. We had to do it continuously for a long period of time. And after he got his promotion, his wife was up for promotion later, and I was her uke, for her promotion. I've been uke for a lot of people, but Mr. Wemra is living in Texas, and I think he's 89 years old, and he still goes down to practice. And he's had one knee replacement, recently, but he works out more in judo than I do. And he speaks Japanese, and this is the first time he's missed going to either the All Japan Championship in 20 some years because of the COVID situation.
And do you stay in touch? And when's the last time you two had a throw together?
Oh, we haven't had a throw together in 40 years or something. My friend Brian Marks lives in California. He lives in Orange County. And about 4 years ago, I think, Mr. Wimmer stopped in to see Brian, and they had some pictures. We were almost going to go to the All Japan Kata Championships a few years ago, but it just didn't work out to do that. And we were going to go with him. And it's nice to go to Japan with somebody that speaks the language. And, he, for many years, he was a Y director, but for many years, he was a flight attendant translator for one of the airlines out of Texas. And so he went to Japan a lot. And he ended up being really good friends with Shun Kasuga, or Kusaka, who is an upperclassman to Mr. Sato that's been to Nick's club. Small world.
Yeah, small world indeed. And I think this is a good time because we're going to start talking about you getting into competitions, etc. Talk to us about what Naginocoda is, the importance of partnering, and the importance of being an uke.
Yeah, well, Naginocoda is the forms of throwing, which in judo they have different katas. Usually Naginocoda is the first one you learn, and you have to complete either 3 to 5 sets of it for your shodan. If you're a competitor, you only have to do the first 3 sets, which are hand techniques, hip techniques, and leg techniques. And then if you have to do the full set, there's back sacrifices and side sacrifices. When you do the katas, no matter which kata it is, I like to think you need to keep in your mind that you're demonstrating techniques and principles of judo. So you need to see the off balance, you need to see the block, and you need to see the final application. So, in Japanese terms, they'd say kazushi, tsukuri, and kake. And then some people say when you finish the throw, you might have kime, which is a focus. And so it's good to learn both sides. You shouldn't just be the one throwing all the time, and you shouldn't be the one only, being thrown. And the thing with Naginocoda is you have to do each throw right side and left side. So this helps to develop a balance where, everybody's going to end up having a couple of favorite techniques, and it might be all right side, right side. Well, you develop your muscles in this situation where if you start working on the left side, you're going to equal that out. It's like people that play racquetball or tennis. Rod Lavier was shown the other day, if you watch, his right arm, if that's the one he used, was an inch bigger than his left arm because that's all he used in tennis. So, each kata has a specific philosophy or ideas behind it. So you start off with Naginocoda, then the next kata generally you have to learn is Katami no kata, which is the forms of groundwork. And in the groundwork, you end up doing several pins where you're pinning the person. And then the next set, you choke the person. And the next one, you go for arm locks, or we'll say locks, because there is one leg lock in there to kind of remind people that the old judo and jujitsu had leg locks. And then you can keep going, and there's Juno kata, Koshiki no kata, Goshin jitsu, Kimi no kata. And the only one that probably knows this is Nick.
Well, let me go to him again. We're going to throw it to you a lot tonight, Sensei Sfino, because again, I see you really nodding at the idea of the arm locks and the leg locks. Talk to us about that. That's something that's not talked as much about in judo.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, JMAC and a lot of the clubs that kind of hail from an earlier era of judo do a lot of groundwork. We do a lot of joint locks, but a lot of judo competitors don't these days because of the way the rule set is. If you get to the ground, you run it for about 10 seconds. If they don't see a big change in what's going on, they stand you up. And so guys have gotten really good at standing up. Fair enough, but it's a big part of judo. And as most martial arts historians know, groundwork was a huge part of the evolution of judo, and judo groundwork was the original source for Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So there's a lot there, and there's still some clubs that practice groundwork in Japan, and they do amazing stuff. And when you watch it, you can see the genetics of Brazilian jiu-jitsu at play with the older style judo grapplers.
What you're reaching back for? Yeah, Sensei Dofa.
I want to ask a question about that because I heard somebody talking about karate being in the Olympics, and they said that it's almost turned into two things. And I wonder what Sensei Panackia and Sensei Suino would think about sport karate or Budo karate, and they're almost becoming like two different things. And is that the case in judo? Can you go into a sports stream and just become something that's just totally sport and kind of miss the whole Budo aspect of what judo should be or can be.
Yes. Different people are going to have different goals. And some people like to just do judo just for the fun of throwing somebody. But then there's people that like the actual competition. And sometimes when you do competition, you may not practice kata. I feel you should. You don't have to do it as much as like I did. But there's an avenue to compete in kata now too, where if I didn't do kata, I wouldn't have competed at the Kodokan in kata. I wouldn't have competed in Toronto or, you know, at the Hershey Center. And this gave me the opportunity. And some people say after World War II, there was a big change. And like Nick alluded to, once you have these set of rules, people only concentrate on the sport part, but there's other parts. There is a self-defense. Judo came from jujitsu, and Kano developed some of the katas, or had the katas, to kind of remind us of some of the techniques that you can't really do when you're doing randori, you know, sparring or kumite that you guys would say, because some of it may be considered just too dangerous. There's this book here, and if you can see that, this is a well-known book, and they give credit to Jigoro Kano, and half of this book is showing techniques, throwing, pinning, armbar, but the other half of this book is on katas. And how many people study the whole art? And our one coach, Tony Oda, or Sensei, used to always start off a kata clinic talking about this. And you can be a super competitor and have a super great throw, but do you know everything else that's included? If you're in school and you're really great at math and your history and the other sciences are not there, you don't get to pass. But you can outwit anybody in mathematics or algebra. So they're trying to make it complete. At the end of this book, they actually show a striking kata. And the lady that demonstrates, this is Miss Yumitsu, and we had the fortune to meet her in San Francisco at Miss Fukuda's club. And then when Mark and I went to Japan, we saw her at the Kodokan, and it's always nice to see a friendly face, you know, when you're in a distant land. And she helped us out there too. So, you know, the striking isn't as sophisticated as some of the other, you know, like most of the karate or even Tang Sudo. They don't have hook kicks. They don't have roundhouse or wheel kicks, but they have a variety of kicks. They have a variety of punching. And in the katas, you also demonstrate some of the punching. And some of the old katas, like Koshiki no kata, this is when the people wore armor, and some strikes aren't going to work against armor. So you're going to have to figure out another way to defeat your opponent.
Just real quick before we go to Sensei Suino with Sensei Dauphin's question, when you started talking about your TV shows that you grew up on with judo being really popular, a lot of those were in reruns. I'm even thinking of like Mission Impossible, or even the way Kirk would move on Star Trek. And it's so funny because when I grew up, just prior to like Bloodsport, it was called a judo chop, not a karate chop. It was called a judo chop for the longest time. And it's funny you mentioned the striking, that you have a striking background concurrent with your initial time in judo, but also that you're talking about it as a fundamental part of the art.
Yeah, there is a chop, but you can't do that in shiai. You're just trying to throw, trip, choke, or armbar the person. But there are, you know, we call it a shuto, or sometimes they call it teikatana, you know, hand sword. And you know, another show that was always great was I Spy, that both of those guys, Robert Culp and Bill Cosby, there's a couple of times they did judo on the show. And if you saw that, there's one time where the Japanese inspector wanted to spar with them, and he did. And that guy was David Chow, or Chow, which he's the guy that was also on David Carradine's Kung Fu show.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Sensei Suino, for Sensei Pinaki, that was a categorical yes. You can degrade it by leaning too much to the sport. Where do you go with that?
I think there's a place for all of them. I think if you only practice sport judo, you're missing something big. And, you know, on this show, we've talked about that in karate many, many times. That karate includes kumite and kata. Judo is the same way. It includes randori and kata. Not everybody does all of them to the same degree. I just love, and I've said this on this show before and many other times, I just love the individualistic creative aspect of judo. There's book learning, and then there's the inventiveness that these incredible athletes have to do these days in order to prevail in the fights. And they're both important. The kata is the heartbeat, the skeleton, right? The ancient roots of judo, and cutting edge competitors, the Olympians and world game guys, they're the living, breathing example of what you do when you apply this against other great judo players. It's all there, just not all of us do all of it.
Yeah, and I think normally when we teach beginners, you teach basic techniques, and at that elite level, sometimes they're doing things now where, like, if you do Marote Surinagi, you're this way, and if you did it like this as a beginner, they say it's wrong. Well, just the other day on YouTube, they were showing one guy that he does it this way now because people are so used to looking out for this other attack. And so the creativity is just crazy, and the people's agility is just amazing. So in the old days, I think people would be thrown much easier, but now they're very acrobatical, and they'll twist out or they'll overturn. And if they overturn, it's no score. You got to throw the person on their back, on their shoulders, especially if Tom Sheehan, the referee's listening there.
So it's funny you talking about this, because I was just watching a documentary on American Jiu-Jitsu and how a lot of Brazilians are taking umbrage at the term American Jiu-Jitsu. And then the person who created the documentary was like, I'm sorry, we've got video going back to Kano and Judo of people doing all the arm bars that then the Brazilians claimed was theirs. And I thought that was really interesting. And then it went on to say what you're talking about, which is that all the innovation that's being driven through competition is creating something that arguably is a next phase of these arts. I really like what you're saying with that, Sensei Suino. That makes a lot of sense to me, that, you know, until you're pitting it. So Sensei Pinaki, let me ask you this. How important is a kata where you're effectively imagining someone's wearing armor? And I'm taking this a bit off of what Sensei Suino just said, which is we're forging new arts in the current time. And then you're going and you're doing this thing. And we talk a lot about kata and karate and how important it is. How important is a kata like that today?
Well, for somebody that's doing just Shiai competition, it may not be as important as somebody that's just trying to learn the whole art. But the thing is, when you do like Koshiki no kata, it's the transition. Can you feel when your opponent is pushing or pulling? And when they push, what should you possibly do? Pull. And then you pull, and then all of a sudden they react and they go the opposite way. Can you switch into this? And the thing is, with the armor, some of these big hip throws and that, you couldn't do that because the armor wouldn't allow you. And there's a throw that Nick and Tom would know, ukigoshi, which is some people call floating hip, would be more applicable. But the principle of this give and take, back and forth, is there. It's in all the katas. Sometimes it's drawn out more in Judo kata, the forms of gentleness or the forms of giving, but it's in Koshiki also. And it just takes a big study that you understand more. And when you're doing randori with somebody, sometimes you just feel that, yeah, I just have to put my foot there. It may not be a specific throw, but I know that if I put my foot there, he's going in that direction. And I just have to get that fulcrum at the right place, and over he goes. If you foot sweep somebody and it's effortless, it's amazing. I can come in and get underneath and try and pick you up, and then throw you. And that's good too. But sometimes when that person just disappears, it's like, wow.
Sensei Dofe, I see you really connecting with the foot sweep idea.
Yeah, I actually am. I did that kata, the I'm gonna pronounce the Koshiki no Kata. I did that with Sato Sensei in Sensei Suino's dojo, and I remember just being totally feeling weird about it. Like even the stepping, how you're like, because Sensei wanted us to walk like we were in, and I didn't understand what was going on. I just was going along with it until Sensei Suino mentioned to me, well, this goes back to the days of when the samurai would have armor on and be fighting each other after their swords were broken and they had to engage. And then my imagination took over at that point, and it was instantly fun to be doing it at that point. So that's why I'm smiling, because I just like hearing these other ideas of the kata.
And knowing that people have been doing that for over 100 years. Now, this effortless, and it's not completely effortless, but there was a guy at the South Oakland Y named Craig Terry, and he was a national powerlifting champion. And I think he was like 198 pounds. And I mean, I was like, okay, strong, but he was strong. And during Randori, for a couple of weeks, I was practicing the step forward, and you don't normally step forward to do Hanigoshi. And normally you do Hanigoshi from the front. Well, he was giving me a strong left lead, and I go, I'm going to do it anyhow. And when I stepped in to do it, there was nothing there. And he just went over. I was amazed. It made my year to be able to make this guy go flying over. You know, it doesn't always happen that way. And, you know, my daughter may have watched me practicing on our monkey bars in the backyard, practicing this pivot to step in front instead of going back behind.
It's funny you say, Sensei Panackia, about the powerlifting guy was stronger, because recently I heard Sean Benson talking about being in a BJJ class and feeling that the judo guys were a lot stronger than the BJJ guys. Yeah.
Standing with the judo guys is the worst. And I was actually going to ask you this because, you know, there's this term mcdojo that goes around a lot, and nobody calls judo mcdojo. Like, I've never seen it online. I've never seen it applied to that art. And what I wanted to ask you is, when you're doing your 2-person drills and your kata, how much is the uke letting you do it, and how much are they resisting?
Well, each person has their job. And what I like to say is, Tori's the person doing the throwing, you know, we'll say the good guy. Tori puts uke where he belongs. Okay. So if I pick you up and I know you're supposed to go off at a 45 and you fall backwards or whatever, I didn't do my job. But now uke needs to give the right kind of lead also, where in Naginocoda, the first step is generally uke reaching out forward towards the person. Then Tori takes over, and he takes that and then continues an off balance. And generally about the third step, he throws the person. Now in the kata, there's, 15 throws, and almost every throw has a different pivot. So you're learning different movements. It's not that I always step right, left, and throw you. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hanshi, what about in karate, Hanshi Legacy? What do you call a good uke, and how much do they really try and hit you, or how much are they just putting something out for you to manipulate?
Well, good uke in karate, I would expect that he does his job by throwing the technique hard and fast where it should go. And a good enough karate practitioner should be able to block it and counter. But it's all done with control. I'm not very familiar with judo. I've had one experience in judo, and that was with Sensei Suino. And to add to what everyone was saying before, it's between sport and non-sport, is that, judo done at a street level is completely different than done on a mat, as far as I can see. Whereas you wouldn't mind crashing a guy in his face when he's going down. He doesn't have to land on his back and stop all the power from going down, right? So that's more like an art, where 90% of you're doing judo. If 90% of the time it can defend you, it's an art. If you This is only my opinion. Right? And if you win a lot of tournaments, I'm not sure whether you could still do that in the street or not. So the UK may not act like a guy in the street when you're practicing. So, but I really don't know. I stand to be corrected on that. But I will tell you this, that the only experience I've had was Sensei Sui and I are also friends. So when we meet, we hug. And just for a joke, I once grabbed his belt when we were hugging at the back. And he said to me, "You're going to find out." I immediately let go. And that wasn't because he won a couple of trophies on the mat, but it was a street level fear that of the damage that he could have done to me. So
that's why in judo, you have kata, which is a controlled form, but then you also practice randori, which is free practice. So that's where you have more creativity, but you have to learn the alphabet in the kata and then make your composition. And randori should actually be different than shiai. The shiai should be more intense, but a lot of times people nowadays do randori with that same intensity. You'll hear that the old masters, you couldn't feel them when you're holding on to their uniforms. It's not that way anymore. Everybody's holding on tight. Now, if you did randori for 30, 40 minutes, people might loosen up more than nowadays. You know, it's like, well, at least you didn't throw me. Well, you didn't throw me either. You didn't do anything. And nowadays there's a lot of grip fighting. Which in my day when I was younger, it's like you took a grip and you figured out how to throw them. Now I'm trying to take a grip that's an advantage for me and a disadvantage for you.
It's funny you mentioned that because what Sensei Dauphin said about when I train with guys and we start standing, anybody who goes cross collar goes for my sleeve at the wrist. I feel pretty relaxed about that. And then when those guys go opposite collar right behind the tricep, I just go, fuck, this is going to be different. And it always is different. And they just move different and they go for your feet different and they get under your hips different. It's a totally different game. It's fabulous. Sensei Pinaki, you might have heard on the one episode where I brought this up with Sensei Suino and one of our other guests, but there was a meme and a thing going around on TikTok that just said, if MMA was practiced on concrete, you'd see a lot more people out there taking judo.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, because when you're hitting cement or your back's on that cement, it's going to be a different world. I wasn't necessarily really great at groundwork. I mean, my philosophy when I was competing is I'm going to throw you. And if I throw you well, hard, clean, boom, the match could be over. It could be over in 10, 15 seconds. If I go to the ground, now I got to figure out, can I pin you for, it's now 20 seconds. It used to be 30 seconds. Or is there an opening for an arm lock or a choke? Now, if I have the pin, I have to hold it for 20. So should I go for an arm lock and lose the pin? And if I don't get that in enough time, the referee stands you up. So you need to know transitions. And, you know, like somebody says, I'll take what you give me. If you stick your arm out, I'm going to try and maybe, you know, put that in an arm bar. I'd like to teach beginners newaza, what I call, they start in rigor mortis. The person's on their back and their arms are straight up in the air and you swim through and do scarf hold, or some jujitsu guys might call it 100 kilos. And then I reach in another time around your head, push your arm out of the way, and it's katagatami, shoulder lock. And then you go the different way and you go sideways and you have yokoshi ogatami, or some people might call it a cat's cradle or a cradle. And then that leads to, how do you get a choke? Or this arm's really long, I'm going to grab, stretch it, step over, and you have jujigatami, or sometimes you jujitsu guys may call it cross lock, something like that. You take what they give you.
Well, you're describing in great detail for someone who says he doesn't have a ground game. That's it.
No, I just prefer to try and throw somebody.
Yeah, it sounds like it's time for your 10 questions. Can I ask you something? How excited are you for these 10 questions? Because you know, you're
Yeah,
the one I might be most excited for.
well, I'm excited, and I've heard them, and each week I may have different answers. And there's one that I hope I don't cry. So,
All right. Well, we're good with tears here. And you know how this goes, Sensei, is we'd love you to be impulsive, but at the same time, expand as much as you like on your own answer. What's the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
see, I've had several different ones. I'd say my bow, my break fall. But if we were actually working out, a lot of over the years it would change, but a lot of times I might catch you with a foot sweep. That's called either dashi barai or kosotogari. And then once you catch on to that, it would be something else that I'd have to try. When I was younger and smaller, I do a technique called either suinagi, shoulder throw, or it's really called back carry, or suyotoshi. I got a little bit bigger. It was harai goshi, sweeping hip throw. And there was a time for uchimata, the inner thigh throw. And now that I kind of started to slow down until I got hurt, Ochigari, which was major inner reap, that I'd be faking going forward. And since I was slowing down, you could react to that leaning back, and then I'd take your leg out and throw you backwards. So, but I like to say the bow, show respect, and that can eliminate a lot of problems.
Who's the most influential martial artist in your life?
Well, in my life, I'm going to have to say Mr. Wemra. Like I said, I did a lot of things. You could call him my YMCA father. We still stay in contact. When I was in school in Chicago, he had moved on to another Y, but he stopped in to visit me. And, every once in a while I'll call. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have gotten into kata. And a couple of months ago, he sent me a Facebook thing saying, I'm proud that, I've done so well, but my other partner did so well in kata. So.
Who is the most influential martial artist of all time and why?
In the different areas, there's going to be different things, but I'm going to have to lean towards Jigoro Kano, because not only did he do judo, but he spread that throughout the world and developed people to carry on. But he also brought, Funakoshi to Japan to help with with karate or with Shotokan. He also had a relationship with Ueshiba and Aikido. And he did more than just judo. He was like the prime minister of education and things like that in Japan. So he spread things, and he helped get the martial arts into the schools. At one point, you could do judo or kendo. So I'm going to lean towards him, but there's a lot of people that have done a lot of good.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Well, I'd like to be able to walk better than I do now. I got hit very seriously in 2011, and I'm not the same person. I had bilateral quadricep tendon ruptures and had to have my quads reattached to my patellas. So I keep pushing with that. But I also keep studying. And I think the longer you study, you get a deeper and deeper understanding. And unfortunately, my other instructor, Mr. Walmsley, said, sometimes you learn how to do judo when it's too late to actually practice it.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
This is a tough one. I'd like him to say that my parents were at the dojo and Miss Fukuda was tapping her foot and Coach Tony Owed was pacing back and forth, and that my kata partner, Mark Pascalelli, was just doing a big bellowing laugh that he had, because it'd be so funny that he knows I'm going to get my my share that night. And my parents didn't watch my judo very often, but and my mom just passed away, so it'd be nice for her to be there. And they came late to my black belt testing. We were all done, and that was in 1972. And then the next time my mom went to an event, it was in 2002 to see me, get some award. And it's like, Mom, it's been 30 years. And that's the last event she ever went to, to see me. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry about her passing. Your favorite film and TV martial artist?
I'm a big Bruce Lee fan. And I mean, with my buddy Brian Marks, I remember we sat through a double feature of Enter the Dragon at the Southland Mall. And with my other buddy Paul Nowak, we went for a sneak preview, Enter the Dragon and American Graffiti, a double
Nice.
that night. And I mean, that was just great. But then Sonny Chiba just passed away, and he did a movie called The Killing Machine. And I remember a bunch of us went down to the Oriental in Chicago and watched this. And he did different moves. A lot of your Kung Fu movies would be 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4. And he did different moves because of the martial art he was demonstrating. And I just thought that was really, really neat. He's a good player. But I like, Sho Kosugi, and obviously Bruce Lee. And with Bruce Lee, that tags into Judo Gene LaBelle. And, I've been fortunate to meet Gene LaBelle a couple of times because of my buddy Brian Marks. And it's like, Gene is a character, but he is such a gentleman. And Brian was able to get us to go to a fundraiser that Ronda Rousey was doing. And Gene was there. And to hear him talk about Ronda and some of the other girls that were fighters there, this guy would do anything for them. And he would do caricatures, and he was selling it for the money to go to those young ladies.
Who, living or dead, as a martial artist, would you like to train with the most?
I think Mifune would probably be the person to get that sense, and if you want to be crazy and say vibration, but to hear or feel what this guy could do, being such a small stature. And I mean, he could do things to big people too. I think as he got older, there's a little people going along, there's the respect that comes with the age, but to feel how this guy could move, it'd be amazing.
If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what gift would you bestow upon them?
The friendships, because all the people that I've had contact with over the years, and I go back to my friend Brian Marks. If it wasn't for Brian, and Brian was my uke for my Shodan, if it wasn't for Brian, I wouldn't have met Ronda Rousey. I wouldn't have met Gene LaBelle. I wouldn't have met Hal Sharp. And I mean, I spent an afternoon at Hal Sharp's house. And it's like I was in heaven because he had all these videos and things. And the friendships. And like I said, when we went to the Kodokan to compete and Miss Yumitsu was there, it's like, I've seen you before. And I developed some friends from the Spirit of the Eagle camp that were from the Netherlands. And the one lady competed in Japan. It's like, wow, a friendly face. And then she competed in Toronto at the World Masters. And it's just nice to see. So the friendship, I mean, there's other parts about learning how to move, but I think the friendships are very important to me, especially now as you get older.
Yeah. Our last two questions come as a pair. Greatest achievement, greatest regret.
Yeah, well, the greatest achievement I'm going to say would be my kids. They're young adults now, and I'm really happy. Personally, I mean, it was great winning the gold medal at the World Masters. And it was nice being considered, one of the top people. But my children were important too. So I like that. And that traveling in there was great. Regrets would be this injury that I had. And there's, I was in bed for 3 months with my legs locked out, and I'm never going to recover. And they don't know exactly why that happened, but some people say I I have sleep apnea and I didn't recover from my intensity. I got hurt in 2011. Francis and I competed in Malta in 2009. And the endocrinologist that came in to see me after my surgery, and I didn't know him, he comes in, he says, Sensei. And right there, I knew something's up, and he knew my Kata partner that had passed. And he said, I looked you up on YouTube, and he thought in 2009, I was favoring my knees then. And this is 2 years later. And, asked some questions. You gained weight, your cortisol levels might be up, but he asked if I snored. And my wife really jumped on that. And so I use a CPAP machine now. And would that have prevented it? They don't know. The orthopedic guy said it could be a rheumatoid problem, but I'm really, really sorry about that.
Yeah, I hear that, and I'm sorry for you. So before we back up and you talk us a bit through all that competing, was there a specific moment when this happened to your knees, or was this was
Yes.
this a thing? Yeah, you want to talk about that, or you want to leave that?
There was 20 guys on my back, and that would be a nice story if that was true. It was during a Kata clinic in Toledo. I live just north of Detroit. And I had worked out at the Y that morning before I went. It was a light workout. And during the Kata clinic, during Goshin Jitsu, there's a move where the guy tries to kick you, you block, you step around, you go down on one knee and throw the person, symbolizing that they're actually landing on your knee to hurt their back. Well, I did that. And when I went down, something happened to my leg. It popped. And I don't know if it was going down or coming up, but I fell to the ground. And I could bend my leg, but it wouldn't straighten. And it felt like there was just jello. And so they dragged me off the mat and I iced it for an hour. And I go, I got to get back to Michigan. And I go, I got a knee brace in the car. Well, I go to stand up on my good leg to get in the wheelchair. Pop, that leg goes. Yeah. And so, I'm down, and I think they finally got me in the chair. And I told Randy earlier, Francis was there, and Francis goes, there's 2 hospitals you can pick. And one was the hospital that they took my old Kata partner, Mark, to, where he died. And so I went to University of Toledo, and it was a strange night. And people helped get me into this van, and the guy, drove me to emergency, and we got there and they said, hey, he needs a wheelchair. And so they brought the wheelchair and they go, well, we can't get you down. Somebody else has to. And I told the guy, Justin, I go, Justin, let's see if we can do it. And I had no idea what went on with my legs. I thought maybe I had dislocated my kneecaps because it was hot. And I tried to step up and I just fell face down on the emergency floor, and Justin grabbed me, hugged me and picked me up. And that's how I should have gotten out. But I didn't know that I had no control over my legs. Yeah. And, that afternoon, they wanted to cut my gi pants off. And it's like, no, these are too expensive. We're going to slide these suckers off. Mm-hmm. Well, they did surgery the next day. They did an MRI and they took me right to surgery. Yeah. And our life has changed now, my wife says.
Yeah, I bet. In the room. So the follow-up to that before we jump back is, you mentioned the idea of you study it now, and there's a point at which maybe you learn judo that moment too late. And how much, like, how hard is that? But also, how awesome is it to look at it from a different perspective where you are studying it differently? Yeah. And it's not just about the physical.
Right. Well, I kind of consider myself a student of motion. Okay. So watching somebody move, be it doing judo or doing karate. When you had Dan Anderson on a while ago, you heard him, discuss about Bill Wallace, how he leans back and then, his abduction there and what goes on. And it forces you now, or it forces me, that I have to watch, and I develop a closer eye is there the exchange the right way, the giving and taking? And like you being an actor, you may look for different cues than what I might look for.
Yeah.
Or a carpenter understands what a right angle might be, or something else that their expertise helps them get that keen eye for something. And I think I'm forced to sit there and watch. Yeah. I mean, I can get up, I can walk through things, but I can't actually do it, like I used to.
Yeah.
We try to remember that country song. I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I'll ever be. It's like, I can throw people, but I can't stand anymore. I would lose my balance, which in the old days, that'd be no problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that's amazing. And I think that's really important for some people on the call, including myself, to hear, is that as the things change and you keep going with it, it lights a different path.
So, and I like trying to teach people or help people, to try and understand that I'm trying to help you get to a place where you're benefiting from my experience. You don't need to make some of these mistakes or whatever. And in kata competition, I made some big mistakes, and maybe we'll edit this out. In 1999 in Welland, when Brian Marks and I were doing Naginocoda, somehow we got mixed up and we were at opposite sides at the end. And when you do the closing, I turned my back to the judges and bowed to the audience. So I mooned the judges. And it's like, you don't want to do that. That's
we have a question from Justin Shea, Sensei Shea, one of our black belts in our club, one of Sensei Dauphin's students. We've been told by our senseis that weapons can be used as force multipliers in combat. Is there a place for the use of weapons in judo?
Well, in some of the katas, they do use weapons. The Kimi no kata, which translates roughly to the forms of decision, was the old self-defense, where you had a sword and a dagger. And then in 1958, they developed Goshin Jitsu, and that was supposed to be more modern, and they would use a stick, a knife, and a blade. I think it's not necessarily as sophisticated as some styles would do, and I think you're better off trying to talk your way out of situations. But when desperate times, you need to try and do the skills that you've practiced. And again, sometimes feeling, if I feel this person pushing this way, then I'm going to move this way to possibly block that gun. But it doesn't mean that you're invincible. The guy's got a gun, give them what they want. But if you think you have no alternative, then you need to try and do the best to your ability.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for that. That's one of the first lessons I remember from you, Hanshi Legacy. I was probably 3 weeks in, and you gave that same lesson. If someone has a gun and wants your wallet, walk away, give them the wallet. I remember going, okay, this sounds pretty real world to me, not fake. Take us back to, we sort of jumped forward from basically the early 70s. What made you decide to compete so intensely? And what I'd love for you to talk about, because you have already a little bit, is your training partners, the relationships you formed with them, and why that's such a deep and important relationship for you, or the multiple ones you had.
Yeah. Well, like I said, Brian Marks, I'm a little bit older than him, but we would practice a lot. And when you go for promotion, you're generally supposed to work with somebody a lower rank to learn the katas. You're kind of leading the way. It shouldn't be somebody that's a much higher rank. So Brian and I practiced, the katas, but we also did regular uchikomis, et cetera, et cetera. I had other friends that were a little bit older, and we did randori. Now, sometimes that dojo was open and we would just go down and do our own thing. And we, at one point with Mike Sternevent in the early 70s, we spent $50 a piece and bought kendo-gu from Honda International So we had the whole kendo outfit and a couple of shinais, and we didn't know what we were doing, but we're beating each other, you know. So, you know, we would do that. But then when it, you know, and I did regular Shiai and things too, but I wasn't, you know, my Shiai record was okay. I wasn't a national champion. But they used to have these Kohaku Shiais, which you have two lines and one person stays up till he loses. And one night, usually it was a Friday night, at the Jackson YMCA, I went a couple of matches, and at the end of the night, Phil Relnick was there, and he's known for Joe, or Musaru Joe, which, you know, Nick would definitely know about. And he said that, Al, you missed an opportunity in Groundwork where I was on the bottom and I could have pushed and had a choke. And so he opened my eyes to that opportunity. And a couple of months later, at a tournament at the Detroit Judo Club, I was able to use that. It just opened up your eyes to, hey, here's something. But then, you know, there's many people along the way. And I had buddies that did Koikan karate. And when I was in college, a friend of mine, Joe Mendoza, he did Koi Kishinkai karate. And so we used to work out together and we sparred. I had never worked out with anybody that I thought he put dents in my forearms, but it really wasn't dents. It was the other parts were swollen and it felt like dents. And this is in Chicago. And we went to the East-West Market Exchange and we bought one of those, well, we bought two karate chest plates, the Korean ones, but these were thin. And we're in the basement of my dorm and I go, Joe, kick me. And I stood there and he kicked, I think it was a roundhouse kick, knocked the wind out of me. I couldn't believe it. When we sparred and he kicked me, I was moving. So, you know, that wasn't so bad. And, you know, Joe and I became friends. We were in anatomy class together. We worked on cadavers and we had discussions about places to hit and punch and things. And we were asked to dismember this one cadaver. And, you know, I told Joe, I mean, we were off to the side. I go, Joe, make sure nobody's looking. And I threw on Udigarami, which you guys would call the Kimura. And I yanked that baby for all it was worth to see what would happen. And on the cadaver, you just heard the shoulder and things give out. And it's like, you know, you never have a chance to really do that. You don't really want to hurt somebody. But, you know, when I've seen the UFC and a couple of those guys had their arms broken, I could, you know, I understand because I was there doing that. But, you know, along the way, Neil Simon needed a partner for his promotion, and he had to learn Judo Kata, the forms of gentleness or the forms of flexibility. And he asked me, and we started going down to Toledo to see Tony Owed, and Francis Glaze was there also. And it was on Sundays, and we do a series each week and then add on and add on. Well, Neil, after he got his Judo Kata, he quit coming. And it was like Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's like, wow, this is a group for me. And I learned, you know, some of the other katas. And my friend Brian, who lived in California after he graduated from high school, came back to Lansing for a couple of years. Tom knows him. And we decided to compete in a couple of local tournaments. And he competed with Tom at the Nationals. And I had asked Brian, I go, Brian, how about if we go to Nationals? He goes, I'm committed to Tom. So, you know, they went, well, Brian went with me in 99 to Welling, and we competed there. And we did okay. But then that next summer, there was this big guy that was at the training place, this Mark Pascalelli. And it's like, I go, if I can do this stuff with that guy, I can do it with anybody. And we started training, and at the Spirit of the Eagle camp, you know, one time I go, hey, you want to train together? And he goes, you had me from hello.
Ah,
And this big guy, when he just said that, it was just so funny. And we had a lot of success, obviously. And,
yeah.
that allowed us, we went to Argentina, Puerto Rico, Japan and Canada and things. So, and, we kept doing that. Now, Francis and I have competed together. We've competed against each other also. Mark and I were the first people to do all 7 katas at Miss Fukuda's tournament in San Francisco back in the day. And we won 3 all-around trophies. And then our friends, Jeff, Junta, and Heiko Rommelman had won 3. And we're all family. And it was like, who's going to do the tiebreaker here? And I mean, we always got the Judo Kata and the Goshin Jitsu. And what's cool about that is Judo Kata is more of a slow moving, you can say gentle, but it's not really gentle. Then you get into the Goshin Jitsu and you can really bang, and the joke was I would tell Mark, you have to be like a tough guy off of the shores of Toledo, because that's where he was from. And he goes, great. He goes, my dad was a longshoreman. And I go, but the problem is there's a guy from Motown that's just a little bit better than you. That means I'm supposed to win. And unfortunately, Mark, passed away in 2005, that same year that we won, at the World Masters. But then I've competed with Francis. Francis and I competed at Nationals in 2009, and we won our divisions there, which allowed us to qualify to go to the World Championships in Malta.
Sensei Suino, I saw you just sort of shaking your head with awe at the idea of doing the 7 kata series. What's the significance of that?
Well, the amount of work you have to put in just to learn the patterns of those katas is incredible. And then to find a good partner where you work well together, assign those roles, the amount of falls you have to take, that's just a massive amount of mental and physical work. And then doing anything around Fukuda Sensei, right, who's one of the most legendary judo figures who ever existed. It just sounds like an amazing experience. Win or lose on the kata, just to be able to train up for those and then do it in her presence would be amazing.
Yeah, her tournament that we would go to every year, near the end, it wasn't the tournament. It was the ability to spend time with her that, she took us, we'll say, under her wing. And our coach, Tony Owen, had passed. And, we'd go to a tournament, and like in Vegas, my wife didn't go to many tournaments, but she did to go to Vegas. They had a party for Miss Fukuda because it was around her birthday. And as we're saying goodbye, Miss Fukuda goes, I want you to come to my room. And I go, Miss Fukuda, my wife is standing right next to me, because she wanted to see what we were, our kata. And to have this living legend take an interest in you, it was really cool. And it's like her dojo in San Francisco, they had a floating floor also. And in the one kata, it's Itsuno kata, there's a point where both people are running at each other. And at the very end, the tori gives way, and uke, which was me, would go flying over. Because if you go together, you're going to, collide and nobody's going to win. This guy drops out, this guy ends up losing. Well, on that floating floor with Miss Fukuda, when I did my break fall, she bounced up. Oh. And that was a lot of fun.
So we have a question from Heiko Rommelman, and I hope I don't mispronounce any of these words, but in any case, Naginocoda and Katame no kata together are called Rendori no kata. Can you talk about this, and have you heard of relation of other kata, specifically either Itsutsu no kata and Koshiki no kata, or maybe even Juno kata and Go no kata?
He said all of that?
He said all of that. I'm reading it. How'd I do?
Well, I think I had said it earlier too. Naginocoda and Katame no kata are considered the Randori no kata because those are the two that you can do when you do Randori. Those had to be approved. If you ever see that old picture where Kano's in the middle kind of in traditional garb, and there's all these people around them. Those were other jujitsu masters, and they were trying to decide what would be acceptable in the katas. In those two, many people had input into that. Now, what was the other part of that question?
Well, can you talk about other sort of pairings like Itsutsu no Kata and Koshiki no Kata, or Juno Kata and Gono Kata?
Okay, well, Itsutsu no Kata is called the forms of five. And if you remember when the masters were on, Lee and his father, they talked about they had that in Tenjin Shinyo Ryu. Kano thought this had the best explanation of combat, where the first one, you come out and it's a continuous attack, boom, 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 and the person falls down. The next one, the guy tries to stab you, and that's the giving way when you hear, give way. Then the third move, you're spinning around and you come together, if you call that whirlwinds, whirlpools, or whatever, and you cast the one person off. And that's kind of like when you do a spinning uchimata. And then the next one, you go in and you go past uke, and then you come back and throw them, which is like the wave going out and coming back. And this may be a combination. I try to throw the person backwards and then throw them forward. And then the last one, I explained how we were coming at each other, and then one drops out and the other goes away. Now, Juno Kata was the forms of gentleness or flexibility. Ju means a couple of different things. The Gono Kata, you don't hear too much about that. They're starting to make that more popular, or it can be, where Gono Kata is the forms of strength. And what's kind of interesting about that is, in part of the kata, we'll start off close to each other, we push against each other, then we pull against each other, then you may push against each other, and then at one point, Tori may duck under and then end up into some kind of throw. And that hasn't always been part of the Kodokan. So there's relationships. I heard the other day where somebody explained Koshiki no Kata was more like something that was done outside because you had armor on. And then Kimono Kata was more inside because you didn't have armor, but they still had their swords. And I got to say something with Heiko and Jeff, that, when my partner died, when Mark died, and again, we had a friendly rivalry between us two teams. The 2 years after Mark died, Jeff and Heiko asked me if I wanted to do a kata with them at Miss Fukuda's tournament. And I jumped at that and said yes. And so I did Goshin Jitsu with Jeff, and I did Itsutsu no Kata with Heiko, and we took first place in those. But Jeff and Heiko still did the other katas, and they were able to take the overall championships. So that's the mutual welfare and benefit part, which, we've gone through a lot of adventures together. So,
Sensei, from watching our episodes how quickly the clock passes, because we're around the horn right now, which I can't believe, because as you also know, we tend to just scratch the surface and we hit that 10 o'clock time. So we're going to go around the horn, and then we're going to give the last word to you before a little bit of housekeeping. Hanshi Legacy, what would you like to say, if anything, to Sensei Panackia tonight?
I found it very interesting. As I said, I know nothing about judo, just what I've heard. So I take it from your night tonight that you're very knowledgeable in your art. I also watched Nick see how he would react, and he seemed to be on side with you. It was a pleasure meeting you, and hopefully maybe we'll see you again sometime.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Suino?
Man, so much. I think we barely scratched the surface. I had a ton of questions, but time is gone. It resonates with me because we've spent so much time in some of the same places, the same kinds of dojos, and have respect for a lot of the same people. I can visualize what it was like to visit and train at the Kodokan. I loved your detailed talk of judo throws and grappling techniques. all the details and the obvious love you have for your training partners. That's wonderful. The people you named, Fukuda Sensei, Judo Jean LaBelle, Ronda Rousey, something I wanted to get into a little more, but we'll have to save. And Phil Relnick, whose name I never expected to come up in a judo conversation, who's Menkyo Kaiden in one of the few United States Menkyo Kaiden licensees in the world in a traditional Japanese martial art. And then you are going to go down in history, Al. You are the only motherfucker who will ever come on Punch, Kick, Choke, and Chat and say, I put an arm bar on a cadaver. That is the coolest thing ever. That's what I got.
Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Dofat.
Yeah, before I talk about the stuff that I learned from Sensei Panackia, I wanted to just circle back quick about street fighting judo. Everybody knows Donald Cerrone from the UFC, who's literally one of the toughest guys around, period, stand-up guy. And he's talking about, he was with another UFC fighter that he wouldn't name in Colorado Springs at the US Olympic Training Facility. And they started to rouse this guy who walked out of a bar, and he was wearing a Team Judo, USA Team Judo uniform. And the guy turned around, and the guy with Donald Cerrone stepped forward like he was going to do something to the guy, and the guy grabbed a hold of him, threw him through a plate glass window right into the bar that he had just walked out of. And he looked at Donald Cerrone, and Donald Cerrone said, "You win." And he just turned around and walked away. So I think judo will work in a street fight. I have no doubts about it if a guy like that's saying that. But listen, Sensei Pinaki, you mentioned lots of names right from the beginning. Nobody else has mentioned Super Dan Anderson. You mentioned Johan Skjelberg. You truly are like a fan and a supporter of this show, and we really appreciate it. Again, like I see all the YMCA paraphernalia behind you on the shelf, and yet another great person who came out of the YMCA. Like so many people that we've interviewed came from the YMCA, started in the YMCA, started in judo. So that's amazing to hear that. I like that a person named Randy helped you get into judo. I don't know why I like that, but I just did. Whoever that Randy Sano is, I like that guy. I want to meet him one day. So Northwestern YMCA in Detroit. You know, I'm from South Detroit, right? I'm from Windsor, so I'm from South Detroit. So we kind of grew up in the same hood. Just really interesting to hear about like horsehair mats and tires under plywood. It's just stuff that people today would never, ever consider, really. They would never think about it. So it's nice to hear that. It's really cool that you learned Naginocoda when you were 15 and you became a world champion decades later with it, which shows something about the dedication of just sticking with something and continuing to do it and not giving up on it. I like that you were the uke for your sensei when he promoted it, and then for his wife as well. I really like the discussion about sport judo versus Budo judo. It's really clear in my mind now, a lot more clearer than it was before, but this conversation has really straightened things out. I liked when you talked about that the kata demonstrates the dangerous principles that aren't really there in Randori or in Shiai, and that's why Kano put those katas together. Like I'll think of those katas forever more different now, even with a deeper appreciation. Something you said that, you know, kata, Randori, Shiai, just that evolution of intensity, like that's something, again, just something that I was a bit gobsmacked when you started to talk about it, right? That there is kata and while we use different terms in karate, it's very similar, right? Like that intensity is something, I like that you said your most effective move today is a foot sweep, but really that it's a bow, and that if you show respect, it eliminates a lot of problems in life. That's a really good message for everybody to hear. I don't disagree with you on Kano being one of, if not the most influential person, one of them. And I will tell you that when I trained at the University of Western Ontario, we trained in a room in Alumni Hall, and it was the judo room. And there was a picture of Kano there, and we were probably the only karate club that always did our Osensei Nirei bow to a judo master because he was up on the wall. And when I wrote exams in that room, I always used to race to try and get to the exam seat underneath Kano. So I liked hearing your thoughts on him. Even with your accident that you've had, that you just keep studying and you have a deeper understanding of judo. I find that very inspirational, Sensei, that, you know, a lot of people would just pack it in and, you know, go away, but I'm super happy that you didn't and you're not. It's cool that you got your black belt in 1972 when I was 1 years old. And I think it's even cooler that it took you 7 years to get it back then, because you hear a lot of stories back then about people getting ranks quickly. And so 7 years, I think, back then to get your Shodan, that's sounds good to me. One thing I want to say to you, Sensei Pinaki, we're all in an elite club here. You're very emotional about your mom, but none of us have a mom anymore. So we all can relate to your feelings and what you're going through. Every one of us on this call can relate to that. And I thank you for sharing that, because it made me think of my mom and the things that I've gone through with her. So it's great that you would bring that up. Mifune Sensei was a genius. I can watch his videos on YouTube nonstop. And I don't know, I think those, you say his advanced age, but I think they were trying to throw him, and I just don't think they could, right? Like I don't think they actually could. I'm going to leave it at the one thing you said. You quoted a country song, but I can be as good once as I've ever been. I believe that you can, and I believe that we all can. And that's the beauty of us all training together. Thanks so much for coming on here, Sensei Panecki. I got a message from my partner. She said, I really like this guy. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Christine said that to me, and I really enjoyed it too. And I really hope I can meet you one day. I'd really like to meet you in person.
Okay, I'd like that too. And, you know, I think I didn't meet you, but I was at JMAC maybe for the grand opening or something when you were there.
Okay.
There's some event, but I was, you know, just in the audience.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that I didn't, I missed an opportunity to come over and chat with you, because I regret it now.
Thanks, Sensei Dauphin. I just want to touch on 2 ideas that really stuck out for me. And it's really just about our time with you. You know, the one thing I really enjoyed is you have this seamless blend of the past and the present, because when you talk about these names and these people and these times, you're evoking them for me. I can see them living for you, but it's not some weird nostalgia. You're here now. It's not like that was a better time. When you talk even about that double feature, et cetera, it's lovely to take the trip with you, but to take it here in the present. And then, you know, the other thing I just want to say, you know, Sensei Suino talked about how we did really just scratch the surface. And of course I want to ask you about those other people, but I'm really interested in you and as much the judo. You know, it was really such a pleasure for you to be so non-pedantically encyclopedic is such a treat. To just sit and listen and learn about this art that you've dedicated your life to. And I'd love to hear about Ronda Rousey, but I'm just as interested to hear your thoughts on one kata versus another, which is why I kept steering us that way. And it's really exciting for me. And I also would like to meet you in person, and we can break open those other aspects of your experience. But thanks for that. And thanks for making it so, you know, you won it through experience, not through reading the book about it. And that's a really, really amazing thing for me. The last word goes to you before I'll throw it to Sensei Dauphin and Sensei Suino to tell us about next week.
Okay, I'm going to bring up 2 things, if that's okay. One, you know, my mother was almost going to be alive for this show, and, you know, she didn't make it. And I mean, you're not going to be able to see this well, but this is a handbill for my grandfather, who had a wrestling match in 1907.
Wow.
And it was a $50 purse and a side bet. And, he was from upstate New York. And so my mom told me about my grandfather. I never knew him. And then, a few years ago, she gave me these handbills, and this one, and it's dark, but he takes on Big Chief War Eagle versus Leroy.
Nice.
And my grandfather passed out because War Eagle bit him so many times. And so, and so I just had to mention it. So some people say it might have been in our blood.
Yeah.
And then I just there's so many other people to talk about, but I got to mention Louis Fuikawa, and Randy and I talked just briefly about him. Louis was one of the founding members of Detroit Judo Club. And, I knew him for a long time. He always seemed old, but 30 years ago, he's older. And one time we're practicing and he comes down and I go, "What are you doing, Mr. Fuikawa? I want to make sure you guys are doing it right." And it's like, I'm 45 years old. I'm the 3rd degree black belt. I think we're doing it right, but he was that kind of guy. But when I was a kid, I was, maybe 15, 16 at a tournament at Detroit Judo Club. After the tournament, he came downstairs and he comes up to me, and I didn't know him well. And he goes, "You know what your problem is?" I go, "No, Mr. Fuikawa, what?" He goes, "You're too cocky." And I go, "Mr. Fuikawa, I try to be respectful, because I was a Mr. Goody Two-Shoes kind of." And he goes, "No, I'm not talking about that." He goes, "Your balance." He goes, "Quit jumping around." So it wasn't that I was too cocky about my balance. And I had fought this one guy that I tried stepping around him, and he was really tall, and he caught me with a real shallow uchimata. And there was a big boom and people asked if I was okay. But it's like, man, Mr. Fuikawa, I try to be respectful. You're too cocky. But it's been a good time, and I'd be happy to talk. There's more stories. There's more adventures. Otochenko, he's 91 years old. If you guys follow me on Facebook, I met him in 1977 or 78. I was in charge of the soccer programs. And here's this guy coming down with oranges for halftime for the under-8 soccer players. And this guy points at me and he goes, "I won that." And I go, "Won what?" I happen to be wearing my shirt from the Nationals. He goes, "I won that." I go, "Yeah, who are you?" And he goes, "I'm Otochenko." I went home, looked it up. He won in Chicago in 1958. It was 20 years, later, and we become friends. And, I got to visit him a couple of weeks ago since the COVID, lightened up. And I think, like Sean was saying, sometimes I help to give a connection with some of these old guys with some of the, the newer or well, not the future, but the early past. And, I saw him the other day and he goes, "Come on in here." And he only lives a mile and a half from my mom's house, And actually I trained with him for a while in the 70s once I found that out. But he goes, "Come here." He took me in the back room and he had this big Chinese weapon. It was a big staff with a big old blade on the end. I go, "I hope he's not going to chop me up." And he was so excited. It was cool. And it was one of those things. He goes, "I'm really glad you came over," because all of his contemporaries are gone, So, but I've had a great time. There's a lot more stories, and I look forward to meeting you guys in person. Maybe I'll be able to get that book from Hanshi.
Right on. Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Dauphin, Sensei Sweeney, you want to take us out with our next week?
How about you, Sensei Sweeney? I can just tell you that, so we're going to do the call next week. Sensei Sweeney can talk about our guest, and we're going to take a week off. There's lots of good names being batted around after that, like chatting with Brad Jones here in Canada. I think we're going to be able to get Carlos Newton to come on here. And Ian Abernathy is another one that we've been corresponding with. So yeah, definitely more to come.
Yeah, well, our next guest is part of Judo Month. That'll be Frances Glaze Sensei, and I've extolled her virtues as just one of the top proponents of judo in North America, but definitely among a very small handful of top female judo proponents in North America. Obviously, now we know a little bit more about her training history with Al. I'm really looking forward to her story. I know a little about her, but I do know that she's an extraordinary kata practitioner and instructor. So yeah, this will just continue our learning about judo next week and our learning about the history of judo in the Midwest. So Francis Glaze Sensei, next Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Punch, Kick, Choke, and Chat.
Well, thank you very much. And I just want to say a quick thank you to Robert Schlumsky running the show tonight, Mike Russell, Victoria Feth, Justin Shea, Alden Adair, Andrei Sedashev. They are the behind-the-scenes PKCC crew. This show does not exist without them. Thank you so much for your help behind the scenes. Be safe, everybody. We'll see you in 1 week. Thanks, Sensei Pinaki.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Good night.
Rock and roll.